to rest. Gonna go to the place that's the best. When I lay me down to die, going up to the Spirit in the sky. Going up to the Spirit in the sky. It's where I'm gonna go when I die. When I die and they lay me to rest, I'm gonna go to the place that's the best.
Alrighty, thanks for joining me again, my friends. All prophecy fulfilled. Lesson number 21 on my series, Gentiles, Christianity's best kept secret. Come on now, let's be careful who you tell this to. We talk about conspiracy theories. Man, this is big. Okay, look, we're going to get into Revelation chapter 5. This is the unveiling. This is the crescendo. This is the big reveal that I've been touting for 2 lessons. So let's hop to it, okay? Revelation chapter 5. This is going to be good stuff. It really is. First, let's make sure we're on the same page. Let's make sure we recap what we need to know going into this. So quick recap. Revelation chapter 7 and Revelation 14. What did we see? Well, we saw number 1, 144,000 sealed of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And it can't get any more clear than that, can it? Number 2, we saw a great multitude that no one could count of all nations, peoples, tongues, tribes, and all that jazz, which was reminiscent, and this is important, of the Abrahamic promises and how his future descendants would be described, depicted. Hint, hint. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Number 3, we saw that this great multitude came out of the great tribulation. Again, the very tribulation that Jesus specifically warned his audience about and said would happen in that generation. Number 4, we had a great multitude singing or crying out, if you will, in worship about their salvation. Well, salvation from what? Well, from the death and the curse of the law. Number 5, we recognized that this was a throne room scene. In other words, you had the Lamb, you had the 4 living creatures, you had angels and elders, and it's really the same cast of character as in chapter 14. Chapter 14, what did we see? Well, pretty much the same thing. Number 1, 144,000 sealed. Same as chapter 7. Number 2, we saw 144 singing, but this time they were singing about their redemption. And it was very similar to how that great multitude was crying out about their salvation. Number 3, that 144,000 singing out, and they were playing harps. Again, seems rather insignificant, but we'll dive into that detail a little bit later. Number 4, only these 144,000 could sing this song or learn this song. Why was that? Because only these 144,000 were redeemed. Only those who were redeemed could learn the song and sing it. Number 5, again, it was a throne room scene, same as in chapter 7. Are we clear thus far? Are we clear? Some of you said crystal. Good for you. Okay. Now, like I mentioned, and I'm not sure if you noticed this, this is important. Revelation 7, you have the great multitude crying out about their salvation, right? In verse 11 it says that they were worshiping. So it kind of sounds like singing to me. Doesn't really matter. And Revelation 14, you have 144,000 singing about their redemption. Salvation, redemption. Salvation, redemption. So let me ask you a question. Would it be fair to say that salvation and redemption go hand in hand? And what do I really mean by that? In other words, you can't really have one without the other, right? Israel was promised redemption. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, again, biblically defined, per the prophets, the long line of prophets, Israel's redemption was tethered to their law and to their first covenant, right? Just as Israel's sins or their ongoing transgression against and under the first covenant and law, the ministry of death, just as that had separated them, their sins had separated them from Yahweh. Well, juxtaposed to that was the promise that they would be bought back and brought back to Yahweh through a new covenant that brought life, juxtaposed to the death of the first covenant, right? Back from the dead, back from a covenantal death. They were dead to God. They were dead in their sins and transgressions against the first covenant. They had become estranged to God. And we've covered this at length, so I'm going to shut my pie hole about that right now. So, and along with this redemption, this is kind of what I'm getting at here. Likewise, they would be delivered or saved. Redemption, salvation. They would be saved from the bondage of sin under law. They would be saved from the death and the curse of the law, right? Those who'd been made dead by the first covenant, ministry of death, would be redeemed back to life through a new covenant that brought life. It just makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. I mean, that makes so much more sense compared to the load of crap that Christianity, tries to sell us. So, look, redemption, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Redemption and salvation are like two sides of the same coin. If you have one, you have the other. And now, if you're still thinking that the 144,000, is a different group than the great multitude that we saw back in Revelation 7, just a reminder before I go on. Did you notice that the great multitude in chapter 7, they were saved? Saved. They were delivered. They were crying out about God's salvation, and they were worshiping Him for that. And the 144,000 in chapter 14 are singing about what? Redemption. Redemption, salvation, two sides of this redemptive coin. Now hold on to your hat here, and I want you to think critically, logically here with me. Let's use reason. Okay, ready? Only the 144,000 could learn or could sing that song because only they had been redeemed. Absolutely nobody else. Holy smokes, think about that for a second. Only they could sing it. They were the only ones redeemed in this story. So if the 144,000 are redeemed, then obviously, they too were saved. They were saved from the death. They were saved from the curse of the law, from the bondage of sin under law. They were saved and they were redeemed. Redemption, salvation, again, two sides of the same coin. Folks, the redemptive coin is Israel under law. Israel under that first covenant. That's what the redemptive coin is. So what in tarnation, pardon my French again, what in tarnation was the great multitude back in chapter 7? What were they saved from if not the very same thing? It's the same group, folks. Now, I don't know if you see a train coming, but you should, because it's heading right for you as we get into chapter 4 here. So pay attention here. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 4. And before we do, let me remind you again, chapter 7, chapter 14 are inarguably the same throne room scene, right? They're taking place around the very same throne of God. That's pretty easy to see, and I don't think many people really can dispute that. Revelation 7:11, all the angels stood around the throne and the elders of the four living creatures and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. Revelation 14 says, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps, and they sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures. Now, what do we see here in chapter 5? Well, watch this. And I looked, this is Revelation 5:6, and I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and the four living creatures, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb. That's Revelation 5:6. That is the exact same throne room as chapter 7 and 14. Same throne, same four creatures around the very same throne of God. You got the same Lamb. It's the exact same cast of characters. Folks, whoever is present here was present in chapter 14 and chapter 7. Now, what do we see here in Revelation chapter 5? How about verse 8 and 9? Now, when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, and they sang a new song. Now, I know this is a bit redundant. Be patient. And I'm going slow here, but I don't want you to miss this. Again, just to be clear, this is the same throne room scene as chapter 7 and 14. Same throne, same Lamb, same 4 living creatures. And here we even have the same harps. Just like in chapter 14, where the 144,000 Israelites, right? They were jamming out on their electric harps, right? And they were singing about redemption that only they could learn. And here we have the exact same cast of characters in chapter 5, and we see the harps, and we see these folks, they're getting ready to sing a new song. All the elements of chapter 14 and 7. It's undeniable, and this is critical. Bottom line, this group, there I go again, this group is one and the same as 144,000 in chapter 14. So, are we clear? Said Crystal? Good. Now, ladies and germs, this is like the last swing of the hammer that really drives in the last nail of the coffin. It really is. Now, what are these folks singing about? Are you ready for it? Revelation chapter 5, verse 9. And they sang a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you are slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Now wait a minute. Wasn't the great multitude back in chapter 7, weren't they from every tribe and tongue and people and nation? Folks, right here is where your brain needs to think, O-M-G. Oh my goodness. Do you know what this means? This group right here in chapter 5, singing about redemption, is the very same 144,000 in chapter 14, singing about redemption. And only they, the 144,000, could sing this song. But wait! Here, right here in chapter 5, indisputably is the same 144,000 because they're singing about redemption. Only the 144,000 could sing about redemption. But this 144,000, guess what? They are redeemed from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Holy crud. This is the great multitude of chapter 17 who was worshiping and crying out about their salvation. Remember? Revelation 7, 9, and 10. Behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. And they were worshiping about their salvation, which is just another side of the same redemptive coin. Holy crap. This means that only this group could learn and sing the redemption song because they're the same group as the 144,000. I mean, are you seeing this? To me, it's crystal clear, and maybe I'm not explaining it properly. I don't know. But it's just all right here. The 144,000 are the great multitude from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Folks, if you're still holding on or holding out hope that the 144,000 is one group, while the great multitude is another group like the rest of all humanity, you know what? I'm sorry, but Scripture itself just crushed that possibility. There is absolutely no getting around this. Listen, this really is the final nail that just seals this coffin shut. This is proof positive, clearly demonstrating exactly what this entire series has been talking about all along, what the prophets have said all along. The only people promised redemption in the Bible from the very beginning was Israel. First covenant Israel under law. The only people needing to be redeemed in the Bible from the beginning was Israel under law. This throne room scene here is Israel's final scene to Israel's redemptive story as they enter into that new heaven and earth, their new Jerusalem. Man, and look, I know this is a bit redundant here. I know it. But let me just try to make this boom, crystal clear. Let me just lay this out like in 5 quick points. I'll put it up on the board there. Let me just break this down one last time so we're clear. Number 1, chapter 7 describes a great multitude, which no one could number, being saved from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. Number 2, it's abundantly clear that the 144 of chapter 7 is the very same 144 of chapter 14, which is the very 144 of chapter 5, and the 144 are none other than elect Israelites from the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, to whom all the promises pertain to from the beginning of the story, way back to Abraham. Number 3, the only ones who could sing this redemption song were the 144,000, the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Number 4, but the 144 here in chapter 5 are the great multitude being saved, being redeemed out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. It's the same great multitude of chapter 7 crying out about their salvation, which means, number 5, the 144,000, the 12 tribes of Israel, were the only ones redeemed out of or from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Let me just bring it down. There is nobody else in this here Bible receiving salvation or redemption. Nobody. And that's what I've been trying to tell you all along from the very beginning. That redemption, that salvation, that all the promises belong to Israel from the beginning. It was their story from the beginning, and it's their salvation, it's their deliverance, it's their redemption here at the end. How consistent is that? It's 100% consistent. It was their curse of the law to begin with, and it was their redemption from it at the end. Christians will fight tooth and nail on this one point that I just made, that I just proved, that I just demonstrated. Well, Scripture just demonstrated, right? They will not concede. If we're not in this story, nope. They will not stand to reason on this. And look, I really don't like to be like a, in-your-face, prove it, kind of a guy. I really don't, who likes to dare people to refute things. But I got to be honest with you. I have never heard anything, remotely close to an explanation that refutes what I've just laid out here. Never. I've never heard anything on it. And that troubles me. It troubles me because I want to know the truth of this too. I want to know what this text is saying. And if there's a reasonable refutation, I would love to hear it. But I never have. And I'm not saying that to be brazen in your face. I'm saying if there's something that I'm missing here, show me. That's fine. I will listen. And I say it's funny because, if you really think about it, I'm not surprised at all by this conclusion. Because this is exactly what all the prophets, just like it says a million times in the New Testament, what all the prophets have spoken. This is exactly what all the prophets have said all along. And then the New Testament writers allude to those prophets to demonstrate that Abraham's seed, according to the promise, Israel would be gathered. They'd be called out of every nation, right, to which they've been scattered to and swallowed up, right? They'd be gathered out of every tribe and tongue that they'd assimilated into within those nations. It's so stinking consistent, I think it's funny. They would be called out from every one of the four corners of the earth or the land to which they'd been scattered. So doesn't it just make sense that it's only the 12 tribes, represented here in Revelation as the 144,000, of whom Gentile Israelites of every nation belong to, who were being called out? They were the ones being fished out from the four corners of the earth. That just makes so much sense. You know what it does? 2 words for you. Full circle. Full circle, baby. And you know what other word I love to use? Trajectory. Just think about, for 1 second, think about the trajectory of this series that this has taken, which really has just followed the trajectory of Israel's story under law, right? Genesis 12, Genesis 15, 17, 22, 48, getting into Deuteronomy 4, 28 through 32, right? And then we get into the prophets like Hosea and Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Then we get into the New Testament. We look at like Ephesians and Galatians and Romans 1 and 2 and 9 through 11. And then finally, here we are in Revelation, and the promises to Abraham's seed are fulfilled with Israel's redemption here in Revelation. It's so stinking consistent. Now look, here's what I kind of was getting at here. I kind of went sideways there. I know that there's going to be some who say, okay, look, what about all those promises to the nations way back in Genesis, right? All nations would be what? Blessed. All nations would be blessed in or through Abraham, right? And what about the healing of the nations? What about that, Ryan, right? That hasn't happened yet, or they'll say something like that. And it sounds like you're saying Israel is just going to bless himself. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, yes, all the promises to the nations were fulfilled. If you know what nations are in view, if you know who the nations are, and if you know who needed the blessing, if you know what the healing was for or from. Yes, all of that was fulfilled. And this is why, I said that I was going to tie all of this stuff here in Revelation to Romans 11, the fullness of the Gentile and all Israel being saved, right? I said I was going to tie it into that, and I was going to tie all this into the promises to Abraham and his seed, Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22, 48, right? Which is obviously tied to the promises to all nations. But again, that's why I'm going to cut it off here, and I'm going to deal with that next lesson. I want to kind of explain that separately. So really what I'm getting at is I want to maybe a little more clearly and kind of condense it down a little bit, how all the promises to Abraham and his seed were fulfilled, which also means how all the promises to the nations or the blessings to the nations were fulfilled. And you know what I'm talking about, right? I know I'm going to get some questions on that, like, how would this produce blessing to all nations? That's what people are going to ask me. How did that work out? How were all nations blessed? How did that produce healing of the nations? What did that look like? Healing of the nations, Revelation 22, right? So that's why I think this is a good breaking point, and I will deal with the blessings and the healing of the nations next lesson. So yes, I said I would do Revelation in 3 parts, but it'll have to be 4, I reckon. But you know what? That just means you get one free lesson, bonus material, absolutely no charge. It's all part of the super service here at All Prophecy Fulfilled. Okay, we will see you next lesson. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that made sense. Made sense to me, but what's going on here might not have come out, properly. But you tell me. Give me some feedback on this. Tell me if this was indeed the last nail in the proverbial coffin. Okay, take care, everybody. We will see you next round. Adios.